Welcome back to B.Hooked Crochet. I'm your host Brittany, and this video is the first of a 4-part Tunisian Crochet Washcloth series sponsored by Clover USA. With the launch of their brand new Interchangeable Tunisian Crochet hook set, we're celebrating with 4 washcloth patterns. Each pattern will give you the chance to use your new Clover Tunisian hooks, learn some new Tunisian crochet stitches, and make something practical in the process. If you're following along with this series between August 13th and September 24th, 2017, be sure to head to bhookedcrochet.com/washcloth series to enter to win an interchangeable Tunisian hook set from Clover. You can find that link right here on your screen in the top right corner. You'll also find the written instructions for this particular pattern on that page. Now let's get started and make our first washcloth. We're going to begin our first washcloth by creating a slip knot. And we're going to start this project very similarly to standard crochet, if that's what you're familiar with and used to. So we're going to place that loop on our hook, and we're going to chain 34. Now when you're working with Tunisian crochet, you do have to create a foundation row, and that's what we're going to be working on in the next couple of minutes. Before we can get to that, we need to chain 34. That's going to be the starting point for our foundation chain. Now once you have your 34 chains, we're ready to begin our foundation row. And what we need to do is locate the second chain from the hook. So I have my first one here, the second one is right there. Now I prefer to work my stitches in the back bump, so I'm just turning the chain over. And when I do that, I can see these little bumps. So that's where I like to work. However, you can work under whatever part of the chain that you prefer. So once you insert your hook into that second chain from the hook, you're just going to yarn over and pull up a loop. And then we're going to keep that loop on the hook. This is where Tunisian crochet differs from standard crochets. We work the loops on our hook and then off our hook. So it's a nice little hybrid between knitting and crochet. So I'll locate the next chain, insert my hook there, yarn over and pull up a loop. Find the next chain and just do the same thing. We're just going to repeat that all the way to the end of our chain. And while we're doing this, we want to be mindful of our tension. Now we are working with a cotton yarn, which does have a little bit of resistance, and that's something that's important to keep in mind. But the main goal here is you want there to be some flexibility of the stitches on your needle. If you make them so tight that you can't move them around, it's going to be a very unpleasant experience. So you want to make sure those stitches are nice and loose on your hook so you can move them freely as you work your stitches. Now what we've just done here is completed our first forward pass. So we've collected a loop on our hook from every single chain. And the cool thing about these interchangeable Tunisian crochet hooks, this set that I have, is that they have a cord, so it's nice and flexible. It keeps it lightweight and easy to hold on to, but we also have these stoppers here at the end, so we don't have to worry about our stitches falling off if we push them down. So when you're working Tunisian crochet, you're always going to have a forward pass and a backward pass to every single row. Now we're still working on the foundation row and we're halfway finished. The next thing we need to do is start the backward pass, and the first thing I'm going to do to start that is just to shift my stitches up a little bit. Now at the beginning of every single backward pass that we're going to do for this particular pattern and for a lot of other Tunisian crochet patterns, we're going to yarn over with that working yarn and just pull through the first loop. So just one loop there. Now if you're thinking at it from a technical aspect, all we did there was create a chain, and that's going to create the edging of our washcloth. Now from here on out, the repeat is really simple. We're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So 2 loops at a time. And then we can sort of shift things around. Then we'll yarn over and pull through 2. Yarn over and pull through 2. And this is our repeat. We're going to keep going until we have no more loops on our hook. And you'll see that I like to just shift my stitches up so I have something to hold on to. And I'm not fighting with myself there as far as holding on to the work and the hook at the same time. If you're a knitter, you're probably familiar with how this feels. But if you're a crocheter, it might be a little new to you, and that's okay. It really just takes a little bit of getting used to. So once you've made it to the end of your row, what you're left with is our foundation. So as I mentioned, this is the foundation row for this pattern, and the next order of business is to talk about the stitch repeat. So we have this foundation row completed. We're ready to move on to row number 1. Well, this particular stitch pattern has a 2-row pattern repeat, and that's because we're going to be offsetting our stitches just a little bit to help create the design and the texture. So the first thing that we want to do is locate our first few stitches. So we have our stitch right here at the very end. We're never going to be working in that stitch because that's where our working yarn is coming from. So this pattern uses the cross stitch, and the name will make sense once you see how it's worked. So the first thing we need to do is skip the first vertical bar. We're not going to work in that just yet. We're going to locate the second vertical bar and insert our hook under just that first leg of the vertical bar. Then yarn over and pull up a loop. And we're going to keep that loop on our hook because remember, it's Tunisian crochet. We're working the loops on and then off our hook. In order to make this a cross stitch, we need to circle our hook back around and catch that first vertical bar that we skipped. So what I do is just pull my hook down. I'm just letting the hook do its job here and hold on to that last loop that I just worked. You can steady it with your finger if you feel the need to, and insert your hook under the front leg of that first vertical bar, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And there we have our first cross stitch made. You can kind of see that it's crossed over, and that's where the name comes from. And we're going to repeat that all the way across this row. So I'm going to locate my next 2 vertical bars, which you can see right here. I'm going to insert my hook under the second one, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then I'm going to circle back around and catch that first vertical bar. So insert your hook under that first one, and you can see here that the first one is always a little bit more difficult to work into after you've already worked a loop from that next stitch. You'll skip the next one, yarn over and pull up a loop into the second vertical bar, then circle back around and catch the first one, and there we've made another cross stitch. We're skipping one, insert into the next, yarn over, pull up a loop, circle back around to that first bar, yarn over, pull up a loop. So we're going to repeat this until we get to the end of the row, and at the end we will have a total of 34 stitches for this row and all of the subsequent rows. It's always a good idea to go back and count and make sure that you have the proper stitch count. If you're dropping a stitch or adding a stitch, then you'll have uneven edges. And once you've finished working all of your cross stitches, I will demonstrate where to work the very last stitch. So I've now made it to the end of my row. I've worked my last cross stitch, but I'm still left with this little piece right here. Well, this is going to be our last stitch. Now remember at the beginning I said technically what we're doing there is we're creating a chain. Well, what we need to do to finish off the row is to insert our hook into that chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, and that's going to represent our last stitch. But we have to be careful about where we're placing our hook and what loops of that chain we're catching, because if we only catch one of those loops, we'll have open holes sort of on the side of our work. So if you turn it in this direction here, you can see the one leg of the V of the chain, and right there you can see the bump. So that's what I want to catch. I want to catch the side of the chain and the back bump. So you want to make sure you have two loops on your hook when you insert it in there. You'll yarn over and pull up a loop, and that's going to finish the forward pass for row 1. Now the backward pass is going to be the same as what we saw for the foundation row. We're going to yarn over and pull through 1, and that is going to be where we're going to work our very last stitch on the next row. So just keep that in mind. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 and do that all the way down the row. Now once we've completed our backward pass for that first row, then our work looks something like this. So we can see the first row of cross stitches, and then we have this open mesh framework. That's always going to be the case. When we work that backward pass, it's going to look like this. And we're ready to move on to row number 2. So row number 2 is going to be worked very similarly as row 1. We're going to be doing a lot of cross stitches, but we're going to start and end a little bit different because we want these to be offset from each other rather than on top of each other. So what we're going to do is locate our first bar. Once again, we can't count the one that our working yarn is coming from. So we'll just find that first vertical bar right here. We're going to insert our hook into it, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Now that's a Tunisian simple stitch. So we're just going to Tunisian simple stitch that first stitch, and then we're going to proceed with our cross stitches. So I'm locating those next 2 bars. You can see them right here. I'm going to skip over to that second one, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then I'm going to circle back around to the first vertical bar, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So I've made a cross stitch there. And we're going to cross stitch all the way until we get to the end when we have 2 stitches remaining. So the very last stitch, which is that little chain that we're working into, we want to keep that one open and the one right before it. So here I am now at the end of my row. I've completed 1 cross stitch there, and I have 1 vertical bar and my chain left over. So the way we want to finish off row 2 is insert our hook into that second to last stitch, or that vertical bar. We'll yarn over and pull up a loop. So we've made a Tunisian simple stitch. And then we're going to work our hook into the same 2 loops of that chain. So you'll see I'm just catching the 2 side loops there, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Now we're ready to work our backward pass of row number 2, and that's worked the same as always. We're going to yarn over and pull through that first loop, and then yarn over and pull through 2 all the way to the end of the row until we have only 1 loop left on our hook. Now once you've completed that backward pass for row 2, that's actually the pattern repeat for this design. We're going to repeat rows 1 and row 2 until we have a total of 20 rows. So we're counting this first row that we did, so we'll just count the cross stitch rows. So that would be row 1, row 2, and as we do the forward pass for row 3, then you would see that one form as well. What we're going to do is repeat rows 1 and 2. So we have rows 1, row 2. We're going to start off the next row with row 1 again. So that means we're going to cross stitch for the first 2. So we're not going to create a simple stitch for row 1. We'll just go right into our Tunisian cross stitch, and we'll do that all the way across. So as I mentioned, you're going to repeat those 2 rows until you have a total of 20 rows. You're going to stop at the end of a backward pass, so right where we just were from a row 2. Once you've completed that, you'll come back to the video. I'll demonstrate how to bind off in pattern, and we'll talk about weaving in your ends and blocking a little bit to correct some of the rolling and the bias that you're going to see. Once you have the length of your washcloth worked up, we're ready to do the bind off. Now, as I mentioned before, you'll want to make sure you end at the end of a backward pass when you're going to start a first row. So if we look back here, we can see that simple stitch from the row 2. So this would be starting a row 1. That's where we want to bind off for this particular pattern. And what we're going to do is bind off in pattern. So our regular row 1 repeat would mean that we would do a cross stitch first. So we're still going to do that. We're going to skip the first bar, insert our hook into the next bar, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And then we're just going to slide that same loop through the loop that's on our hook. Now we need to circle back around to that first bar, the one that we skipped. We're going to insert our hook there, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then slip stitch it off. So pull that same loop through the loop on our hook. Now we're just going to do that again. We're going to skip the next bar because we're working a cross stitch. So we'll insert our hook into the next, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull the loop through. Then circle back around, catch that skipped loop, and we'll work that one off as well. And that is our repeat for this last bind off row. We'll demonstrate quickly one more time. So I'm going to skip the next bar, and we just want to repeat that all the way across. When you get to the end of your row, I'll demonstrate how we're going to bind off and weave in your ends. Once you've made it to the end of your bind off row, you don't want to forget that very last stitch that's here at the end. So you'll insert your hook under those 2 loops, just like we talked about previously. You'll yarn over and pull up a loop, and then just pull that loop through the loop on your hook. Okay, so once you're finished with that, leave yourself a tail that's about 6 inches long. Trim that off and pull that tail through the loop on your hook. And from here, we're ready to weave in our ends, and we're going to talk about the shape a little bit here as well. So the first thing we need to do is weave in our 2 ends. Now I like to use these Clover bent tip needles. They work really well, especially for weaving in on this texture that we have on the back. So this is very similar to a Tunisian purl stitch. And what I like to do from here is just work the tail and swing it around and catch each one of these little bumps. So we're pretty much just braiding it in, if you will. So swinging it around, catching as many of those as you can. That's where the bent tip really comes in handy. Then once you run it in one direction for a few stitches, then I just like to turn it around and work in the opposite direction. Then once you have that nice and secure, you can go ahead and trim off the tail. And then we just have that last end to weave in. So I'm going to do that next. So the last thing I want to briefly mention here is about the overall shape. So what you're seeing here, you see how we have that lean that's going, very predominantly in this direction here. Well, this is the classic case of Tunisian crochet bias, and it happens all the time. It's nothing that you did. Obviously, you can see it happens to everyone, and that's okay. It's really easy to fix. Oftentimes, you'll find that the bias is very stitch dependent. So this cross stitch does help promote this bias or that lean in one direction, and it's based on the handedness of the crocheter. You'll find that your work will lean in the direction towards your dominant hand. So that's where we can see that shift in this direction here. Okay, so how do you fix the bias? Well, the best and easiest way that I have found to fix this is to wet block. Now, what that means is you're going to just grab some type of athletic flooring tile. You can actually buy blocking boards, and the main goal is that you want it to be water resistant. And you're going to take some pins and you'll pin the entire thing down. Now, I typically like to start at the corners. I'll stretch it out a little bit, and you want to pin it down in the shape that you want it to stay in. Now, once you do that, you can take a spray bottle with some lukewarm water. You can saturate it and allow about 24 hours for it to dry completely. And when you unpin it, you'll find that the bias is going to be straightened out. Your edges aren't going to curl quite as much as you see here, and the edges are going to be a lot more even instead of sort of wavy like this. Now, I do have a very detailed tutorial on blocking your project, and you can find that at bhookedcrochet.com/blockyourproject. That's going to cover wet blocking, steam blocking, finger blocking, pretty much every other type of blocking that you can imagine. Don't forget to head over to bhookedcrochet.com/washcloth series to enter to win your very own interchangeable Tunisian crochet hook set. Now, also, I would love for you to share your progress photos with me on Instagram. You can do that by using hashtag B.Hooked. I'll be in there and having a look at all of the different color combinations that you're coming up with this really cool stitch pattern. Well, washcloth number 2 will be available online on August 27th, so keep making washcloth number 1, and I'll be back at you on August 27th, 2017 with washcloth number 2. Have fun, guys!